Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. All right, first question. Hi coach, what is the best way to introduce running 30 to 60 minutes in your strength training program without sacrificing strength and size? Best to do it on training days or on non-training days, and if on non-training days, best the day after a squat sessions or the day before? Thanks, coach. Well, how are you you're gonna be squatting multiple times a week anyways. I'm not sure how you're gonna pull that part off. Here's what I'm going to say about running. I don't generally recommend running for lifters unless you've got a specific reason for it. Now, if you've got a specific reason for it, you're going to need to program it and make it work. And I am saying this as someone who has done distance running. I understand that's a point of contention on the internet, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I've done distance running. I've not done distance running while being a lifter. If your job involves running, you're military, you're going to be tested on running for the police, or you want to be a hybrid athlete, or you're a football player, okay, you're going to have to program this stuff. But if you're a lifter who just happens to want to pick up running without an actual reason, I don't know that I would advise you to do that. If you're doing it just for conditioning, running has its own negatives on the body. It has its own impact on everything from your bone density and stuff in your legs. It affects microfractures in your bones. It has its own set of problems. It's got to be programmed accordingly. So I would ask you, first of all, to make sure that you need to be running for a reason. If you're just doing it for conditioning work and get in shape, there are better options. There are better low impact options: cycling, swimming, GPP work. There's a lot of better options that are a hell of a lot easier on your body. But if you need to do it for work-related issues, or you happen to want to pick up a sport that's going to require you to run, then by all means, start working it in on your off days. But is there a way to guarantee you're not going to sacrifice some strength at first? No, there isn't, other than to start very, very, very gradually, only on your off days. Right? And that's what I would recommend. It's the direction you need to go with it. But I would also ask you to make sure that running is the right option for your conditioning work. You need to make sure that it is, because it may not be, depending upon your goals. All right, next question. Jason, I don't think you've dived into anti-inflammatory meds and muscle growth, things like Advil and Aleve, etc., and their impact on recovery and growth. These definitely an impact, but I'm on the fence as to how much of an impact. You feel me? All right, you're talking about NSAIDs. This has been a point of contention in the sports science literature for quite a few years. It's gone back and forth. Now, to my knowledge, the current data doesn't suggest that they're particularly a problem if they're not abused as far as muscle growth goes, right? However, let's put the added caveat in. Does anything that suppresses an inflammatory response immediately post-workout a good idea? No. Usually when we start studying anything, including things like vitamin C, vitamin E supplementation, what do we find? There's data showing that immediately post-training or post-exercise that taking vitamin C blunts the training effect. And I'm not making that up, guys. That's been studied. It does seem to be the case. So like people who are going to take in a vitamin C supplement right after they train are basically undoing half the training they're doing potentially. They literally are just wasted part of their training. And that includes cardiovascular training too. So people who go do a 5-mile jog and who pop vitamin C right after actually seem to get some of the benefit of their jog reduced. So, you've got to think about this stuff in terms of inflammatory response. So here's what I would say. The general consensus on the data right now is that it doesn't seem to be a real problem for training. However, if you look at different things that have been studied, some common sense would dictate if you don't have to take an NSAID immediately after you train, if you can wait, it would probably be a good idea to go ahead and wait, just because of some of the things we've seen that reduce inflammation or even oxidative stress immediately after you train can blunt training response, which makes sense when you understand how training response works. It might be prudent to not take them if not necessary too shortly after training. And I think that's a reasonable approach to it. Now, if you're having to take them because you have a real medical issue that's requiring it, by all means take them, because whatever issue is going to be offset by them is probably more important than gaining that extra pound of muscle this year, right? Obviously, some common sense. But as far as what the data says, it's always been a bit sketchy. It's gone back and forth, but I believe the consensus is they don't particularly seem to be a problem, but if taken in large amounts, they probably still could be. All right, next question. Hey, JB. I have been training for a few years now and recently came to the realization that I have a weak anterior chain and have some interior pelvic tilt. Do you think swapping out low bar back squats for front squats could correct it? What? What? Some of my stats: 5'7", 177 pounds, deadlift beltless 405 times 6, low bar squat belted 315 times 5, overhead press, blah, 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 bench 225 times 6, front squat 215 times 5. I don't think that you necessarily have the problem you think you do. I don't think you have the problem you think you do. And I'm not saying you might not be posterior chain dominant, but if you are, that's a better direction to be. And in other words, if you had to be dominant in one or the other, which one's going to be better from an injury prevention and a stability perspective? Being posterior chain dominant. But here's my question. In what world do you think quads are the limiting factor on front squat? Like, you're basing this on your front squat versus your back squat? You really think quads are the limiting factor on that? Have you ever seen any data whatsoever, a single study that's ever shown that quads get more work on the front squat than they do the back squat? I haven't. Biomechanically, is there any reason to think that? No. So why would you be weaker in terms of ratios on the front squat versus the back squat? You have a weak upper back. You have a weak upper back, not weak quads, right? That's what would cause that. Do some safety bar squats. Do some seated good mornings. Do some stuff for your T-spine. Do some stuff for your T-spine, because that's clearly your weak link. That's clearly your weak link. Because it's not like your gap is that big in your back squat versus your deadlift, for example. It might seem big, but it's not big for your level of training. As you get more and more advanced, the gap closes, but you're not a super advanced lifter yet. You're getting up there. So I would suggest to you, given what you can what you're capable of back squatting, assuming that's to depth, I don't think you have a quad weakness. Overall, I think that if the case of the front squats, it's your upper back, because that's what would cause that. Because front squats don't use the quads more than back squats do. They don't. They just don't. All right, next question and last question of the week. Hey, Jason. I've recently started using a conjugate style of training as of a late intermediate. I also do MMA recreationally and want to ask if you think that I can fit 2 heavy bag conditioning workouts a week into non-lifting days while eating at maintenance without interfering too much with my recovery. Well, here's my question. Are you conditioned already? That's actually the answer to your question. It's going to be based completely upon your current level of conditioning. Have you been doing conditioning work for your MMA and bag work already? If the answer is yes and you have a baseline of conditioning, perfectly acceptable. You're not going to see negatives, particularly if you're eating enough food to make up the difference and getting enough protein. It's not going to affect your training negatively. It's going to be just fine. If you are unconditioned and you start adding in conditioning work, yes, you're going to see a stall and a possible small regression until you adapt to the conditioning. Now, fortunately for you, conjugate style training lends itself very, very, very well to athletes, right? Kind of come back to the other points we've made about it. Who all uses it? NFL players, hybrid athletes, fighters, all sorts of people very successfully at a very high level implement conjugate style training, and even, upper lower concurrent periodization in general. It's used very, very successfully in these endeavors, and they have no trouble doing their conditioning work and sport specific work. So you're working with a training style that actually lends itself very, very well to athletes who even need a high amount of conditioning. So you've made one of the better choices. So you should be good to go there. It's just going to be the issue of how much extra conditioning are you trying to add in relative to your level of conditioning already. So if you're just now fresh starting, it can be problematic at first until you adapt. It could take 3 weeks up to 6 weeks for you to adapt. However, if you've already been doing all this bag work, to slowly add a little bit more and build your work capacity and conditioning, you should be fine. You should be fine. You shouldn't see a serious problem. And if you do, you probably aren't eating enough or sleeping enough. Or you need to reel the volume in of the conditioning just a hair and then slowly ramp it back up over time. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.